listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. And full disclosure, we are taping this Thursday afternoon before the Memorial Day weekend. We hope everybody has a happy and healthy Memorial Day, able to obviously remember those who paid the ultimate sacrifice to give us the freedoms that we have here in our great country of the United States. But we have a special GM Shuffle podcast for you guys, as we got a special guest, our buddy Brian Baldinger, NFL analyst for NFL Network, Fox Sports. You can see him on Twitter at Baldy NFL. Baldy's breakdowns, always a treat for any football junkie out there. Also, check out Baldy Talking Ball on YouTube, hosting The Best Football Show. That's the name of the podcast. That's the name of the show, The Best Football Show. Baldy, we appreciate you joining us here on this holiday weekend, man. How have things been this offseason for you?
Well, it's we're cruising along, aren't we, Femi? I mean, we've gone through all these hurdles, you know, from the combine to the draft to this, you know, the whole thing. I mean, whether it's the schedule release show, like here we are, we're at OTA. So it's time to really start talking about it with Mike here. So I'm excited that you guys have me. Why not?
Yeah, I love it. And, you know, you traveled all over. You've been snorkeling everywhere. I follow you on Instagram. I love it. We're disappointed you're not here for Memorial Day weekend back here in the backyard here in Ocean City, but you're going to have to make an appearance there, Baldy. A lot of people are wondering when you're going to show up, including Millie. But I want to start off with this, my favorite subject of the offseason. When the Super Bowl winning champion Atlanta Falcons turned in the card to select Michael Penix, your reaction was?
I anticipated it, Mike. I forget about the money they gave Kirk Cousins. I thought Arthur Blank was going to pull the trigger on that, because the only time the Falcons have ever been relevant under Arthur Blank is when they had Mike Vick or Matt Ryan. And I think Kirk Cousins, even though they paid him a boatload of money, I thought it was kind of more of a stopgap than a long-term answer. And I thought once they went and privately worked out Michael, talked to the agent, and then, you know, met with them and found out what kind of kid he was, I thought, despite a lot of other needs, I thought they were going to pull the trigger on Michael Penix.
It's really fascinating because Michael and I were sitting here in Las Vegas at Circa on the NFL draft night, and both of us were stunned that they went ahead and did that. I think a lot of people in the football world were stunned. I know there had been some rumblings about it over the weeks leading up to the draft, but, you know, there's rumblings about everything come draft process. You don't know what to believe and who to believe. But now that they made that selection, we've been talking about the dynamic of the team, because this is a young team, especially those skill guys with Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London. And now here comes Michael Penix Jr., who has played a lot of football, and Kirk Cousins still rehabbing that Achilles injury. He was on the field at OTAs this week, but he's been rehabbing the Achilles injury. What if Michael Penix Jr. is out there setting the world on fire at OTAs and early in training camp? Does that make for an awkward dynamic in that Falcons locker room?
Yes. Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a completely different dynamic. This isn't a guy that, I mean, I think, you know, because the players know what's going on. The players know whether a guy can play or can't play almost immediately. Forget about pads or preseason. You step on the field in OTAs, players know if you're a player or not a player. Like, they smell that out. So you never can lie to your team. But Michael Penix goes out there and plays really well. The dynamics completely change. You know, you can't put him in bubble wrap and go, it's Kirk Cousins' team. It's he's the starter. He's the long-term answer. I don't know that you could do that. They have to deal with that. If Michael Penix plays really well, and look, it's preseason, always getting hit. You know, we're not going to know a whole lot, but players will know. Players will know if this guy is a guy, because I played with my share of quarterbacks that couldn't play that got drafted high, and we knew they couldn't play. You step in a huddle. They had no self-confidence. You talk to anybody in New York that was there with Zach Wilson, they'll tell you, this guy struggled with the playbook, struggled with calls, and he proved it over 3 years. So guys will get a long look here this offseason at Michael Penix Jr.
Yeah, to me, I said this in the beginning, Baldy. It's okay to pick Penix, but you didn't need to pick. You could have done one or the other. Like, you should have known in February that Penix was going to be there at 9, and you could have had him, and then you saved $100 million and put it into a defense that continues to pass up defensive linemen at an alarming rate, and then you're 29th in the league in forcing turnovers, 31st in interceptions, and you got to make some plays, and you've done nothing to help your defense, a defense that Baker Mayfield took the team down in the 2-minute drill at home in Atlanta and beat you. So, look, we've been beating that horse forever. Let's shift gears. You talk about the Jets, right? I know you know them really well. What's your expectation? We call them here at the Shuffle, we call them the Ifers, because if they're healthy, they can be very good. What's your thoughts?
I'm right with you, Mike. I'm right with you. You know, Aaron Rodgers came out on Tuesday, and said, look, if I don't play at my level, everybody's going to be gone. And, you know, like, I mean, that was a soundbite that kind of traveled and had legs, but he wasn't wrong. Like, if they make a mistake on Aaron Rodgers, he gets hurt. The offensive line falls apart with older guys plugging in at the tackle position like they did a year ago. And this thing collapses. Joe Douglas, you know, Robert Saleh, they'll all be gone. If he goes out there and he balls out, like I can, you know, paint a scenario. I know you can too, Mike. But if you paint a scenario where you give this defense a lead in the fourth quarter, I don't care if it's against San Francisco or Tennessee or New England, and you let that front get after you with the way that they could cover on the back end, like they could win a lot of games. So they're ifers. If they can stay on the field, if they can stay healthy, all that kind of stuff, you can get this defense a lead. You think about last year, Mike, their quarterbacks threw a grand total of 11 touchdown passes a year ago in 17 games. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't win games if you're not scoring points. And the defense eventually collapsed from just being on the field. But this is a defense that's capable of taking the ball away, creating turnovers, all that kind of stuff if teams have to throw it and they're playing from behind.
Let's stay in the division, Baldy. You know, you're down in Florida. You were at Miami Dolphins OTAs last week. There's a lot of expectations for this Dolphins team after making the postseason in back-to-back years. I guess, what's your takeaway from going to OTAs? I mean, it's hard because there's no pads, there's nobody's hitting. It's not as competitive as a training camp. But just what's your overall kind of, I guess, sense of what the Dolphins are at this offseason and the loss of Vic Fangio going over to the Philadelphia Eagles? Interesting comments from Javon Holland about it's a complete 180, this defense, now with no longer Vic Fangio being there. What are your expectations for the Dolphins in this AFC East in the regular season later on this fall?
Well, I think their offense can still be really dynamic. I mean, Tua played all 17. He threw for over 4,600 yards. I mean, he had a great season. And that was with wide receivers in and out of the lineup all year. You know, Tyreek just faded down the stretch with injuries. So did Waddle. So did Mostert. So did Achane. Like, if they can stay reasonably healthy, they're going to score a lot of points. I mean, Mike is a good offensive coordinator. He's got a very creative mind when it comes to that and how to, you know, create explosive offense. He's got that. Now you add Odell Beckham. I'm not sure what he adds, to be honest with you. I mean, Waddle and Tyreek are outside receivers. None of these guys are inside receivers. So they've got Braxton Berrios who can play in the slot. They don't really have a tight end. They don't really have a slot receiver. So the weaknesses that they had offensively last year are still there. They still have very big question marks on the offensive line. When Connor Williams got hurt last year, the offensive line really took a dip. They didn't replace him. And Teron Armstead, look, we all love Teron Armstead, the man. Like he's got serious, you know, concerns health-wise, whether he can line up and play out there. And when he goes down, they really struggle. Now, maybe Patrick Paul, their second-round pick out of Houston, can play at a high level. We'll see. But, you know, they should be good offensively. Defensively, Anthony Weaver, I think, is a good coach. You know, he's been a coordinator. He's been through the Baltimore system. It is different than what Vic does. They've got to replace a lot of pieces defensively. I watched them yesterday. There's, you know, Jalen Phillips still hobbling from an Achilles. There's Bradley Chubb. You know, you got young kids in Robinson and Kamara, you know, that they're counting on, but they're rookies. So, and at the defensive tackle position, it doesn't look real strong at this point. I mean, they just got a bunch of guys in there right now. You know, they got just guys. So I think the defense takes a step back, but maybe it gets compensated with an offense that could put up 28 or 30 points a game.
Yeah, or can they beat a good team? The question I have is I listened to the comments of the players about Vic complaining that he worked them too hard. And, you know, you live in Fort Lauderdale in the offseason. Yeah, there's a lot of things to do down there. Now, if Vic's going to go to Philly. And we know Philly, just looking at their team, how hard did they practice, especially when you see Jalen Carter and you see, Davis get heavier as the season went on. How's Vic going to react to that? Because I think Vic is from the same school that, hey, we got to practice good to play good, and we got to practice. We can't walk through. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it's 92 right now in Miami, Mike. It's summer heat. So, they have an indoor facility, but it's an advantage if these teams come to Miami and play. And you should be in better shape than anybody that comes to play. And they haven't been like that, but they should use that as an advantage. I'm with Vic. Now, look, Nick Sirianni, I don't know what they do, Mike, honestly. You watch him at practice. I mean, you could have a part-time job and still be a member of the Eagles and get through practice. It's just – but at the same time, they've started 8-0 and 10-1. So it's not like they haven't gotten off to good starts the last 2 years. And he inherited a team that was 4-11-1, and they got into the playoffs. But as the season went on, I mean, Jordan Davis, did anybody pursue the football the last 6 weeks of the season? It didn't look like it was important last year. They were as bad a tackling team as it was in the NFL last year. And the ball went over their head over and over again. So only Washington was worse in pass defense. So there's a lot to fix. And I'm sure Vic, I go back with Vic when he was, the linebacker coach for the Dome Patrol, Mike. He only knows one way. And so I'm anxious to see OTAs. I'll be there next week or the week after. I'm anxious to see summer camp and to see if they do more than what I've watched them do over the last couple seasons in camp.
Yeah, well, the prognosticators and the betting market seem to be in on the Philadelphia Eagles this season. They're now the favorites to win the NFC East. We've heard the stat, no team since 2004 has repeated as NFC East champions, so that doesn't bode well for the Dallas Cowboys. We'll talk about the Cowboys on the other side, but I do want to ask you, Baldy, when we come back from break, about Jason Kelce. That's a big loss for the Eagles in the middle of that offensive line. On the field, off the field, what he's been able to do as a leader for that Philadelphia Eagles franchise. Big guy to replace, and we'll see if the Eagles can do just that. We'll hit some other NFL topics as well. We're on along with Brian Baldinger of NFL Network and Fox Sports here on the GM Shuffle on the DraftKings Network.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
So the Eagles made a number of additions throughout this offseason, signing Saquon Barkley away from the New York Giants, also in the draft addressing the secondary, which was sort of the Achilles heel at the end of last season, drafting Quinyon Mitchell and also drafting Cooper DeJean. But the middle of that offensive line, a big vacancy, Jason Kelce retiring. Now he does what we do. He talks about football in the media space. How do the Eagles go about replacing the player, but also the leader, most importantly, of Jason Kelce after many years in the Philadelphia Eagles organization?
Well, it's interesting. And, you talk to people in Philadelphia. Jason's he's in the NovaCare building every day. He's still working out there. He's talking to the coaches. It's almost like he hasn't left and he hasn't retired as much as he's still around there. Now, the replacement part, it's going to be tough. I mean, Cam Jurgens will be the starting center. I mean, he was involved in the process of kind of evaluating him when Cam came out of Nebraska 2 years ago. That Cam is very, very strong. I think he's pretty athletic. He's not Jason Kelce athletic, but he's pretty athletic. But honestly, the protections, working with Jalen Hurts, sitting down the film and really looking at protections, identifying the front, really looking at what the defense is doing. He was another coach on the field. And then any sort of adjustment that was made on the field, you can always go and see Kelce talking to Jeff Stoutland, Kelce talking to the offensive coordinator. I mean, Kelce was involved with all of the in-game maneuvering that you have to do, when you can't get to the mic in your inside zone, how are we going to block this? Even last year, when I remember getting text messages from guys on the offense line when they're getting ready to play the Rams. And Kelce was like, we can't have our normal protections with Aaron Donald. We got to, he made the adjustment during the week of how they were going to take care of Aaron Donald. And they shut him out, and they won the game. But Kelce, that part is going to be hard to replace. And Cam Jurgens, I think, is going to be a quality player. They've the replacement's been in the building, but all this stuff that you have to be able to fix in real time, he's not going to be there to help him do that.
You know, Baldy, after every game, you always watch Kelsey go over to the opponent defensive coordinator and have a conversation, because that chess match between the coordinator's blitz package and him was something that was really kind of interesting to watch. And, you know, when he ran quarterback draw, Hurts, to me, every time he ran quarterback draw, that was an audible done by Kelsey. So the actual protection schemes and getting him in, Hurts had none of that to worry about, and so he handled all that. And I think that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. But what is the bigger adjustment? Are they going to be committed to running the ball with Barkley when we know Femi's guy Kellen Moore is anti-run the football, but they got to run the ball with Barkley? To me, that's their success element in play action pass.
Before I get to that, Mike, there's one other thing. You know, I remember like this tush push took over the league. I'm surprised they even allowed it, to be honest with you, but because it was impossible to officiate. But, you know, I remember talking to Stoutland about it, and he's like, you know, Baldy, before we had the tush push, Carson Wentz was 36-38 on quarterback sneaks. You know, he goes, and then he says to me, he goes, there's a common denominator here, and that common denominator is Kelsey. Like his ability to just get underneath nose tackles and defensive tackles and start to push, like that's gone. And that was a big component to staying on the field, converting short yardage goal line situations. But yes, I mean, Saquon, in theory here, Mike, he could get runways that he's never seen before, and he needs a runway. He's no different than Derrick Henry. Some of these backs that just don't make people miss, they can't just elude defenders. He needs holes. He needs a runway. He might get that behind this offensive line like he never saw in New York. And he's an every down back. And so you have to figure out a way to really get him started before you really start thinking about all the other components on this offense right now. So I am with you. Like this thing, they have to be committed to the run. For whatever reason, they stopped that last year. It made no sense, all the way to that ugly playoff loss to Tampa, where they just got out of it way too early.
I want to switch gears to another contender in the NFC, not my Dallas Cowboys, but the Detroit Lions, because the Lions, they signed a lot of their guys a very expensive offseason. Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell. I think a lot of people, if you polled most football fans, would say that the 49ers are probably the team to beat in the NFC. Would you say the Lions are closer to the Niners, or are they closer to the pack of the other teams chasing San Francisco?
Well, I mean, Chicago beat them last year. They should have beaten them twice. Green Bay beat them. So they've got tough outs in their own division. But they, like, from a talent standpoint, they're as good as anybody in that division. And look, if Dan Campbell just does the right thing in a playoff game against San Francisco, they win the game. But, you know, he's a little stubborn in some of these calls, fourth down calls. So, like, he has to live with that. That's fine. It sends a message to the team, regardless, that we're going to be aggressive, stay aggressive. But they can beat you in a lot of different ways. They can run it. They've got a very good offensive line. The tight end they drafted out of Iowa last year is an elite player already. So they can beat you in a lot of ways. They really addressed the quarter position, which was a weakness last year. And so at least on paper, like Detroit is, they're a Final Four team on paper right now. And so Jared Goff is a proven pocket quarterback who stays healthy and makes good decisions. And if he continues to do that, Detroit is going to make a lot of noise in the NFC this year.
Baldy, let's talk about. I've asked everybody that we've talked to on the show, and Femi and I have covered this. Who do you think? Everybody talks about who's going to win the Super Bowl. What of all these teams, and you study them as closely as anyone, who will have, or give me three teams that you think will have the first pick in the draft this time next year?
Oh, man. Well, it's Carolina. Did they get the first pick, or they traded that away, Mike? Because they still look
God
like
only knows
you
what
could
Tepper
change
will
general
do.
managers. You could change coaches. Just tell me how they're going to win games. Just tell me what their path to victory is. I don't care what Dave Canales does, or they look like on paper that they're still a team that is a long, long ways away. So, I mean, Carolina might be, with this color right here, they might be picking number one again next year.
Yeah. How about your Giants? What are your thoughts on that? We had the Giants and the Raiders in the category. So what are your thoughts on those two teams?
Well, the Giants can continue they can blow out Wink Martindale, and they can change offensive line coaches, and they can continue to change coaches or, all that stuff. Like, how did the roster get better? They overpaid for Brian Burns, like, to a degree that's just ridiculous. Like, Brian Burns is a good player, but he's not TJ Watt. All right, he's just not that type of a player. So, but they paid him to be that type of a player. So I don't know, they had 30 turnovers last year, Mike, and they still couldn't score any points. 30 takeaways, they were amongst the leaders in takeaways, and they still couldn't score. Now, is Daniel Jones going to come back and remedy that? Is, Malik Neighbors going to remedy that? Are they going to be able to run the football? What are they going to be able to do well? It looks like it's going to be a struggle. I mean, they went to the playoffs 2 years ago with Saquon and Daniel Jones ran for over 800 yards. Is that a good remedy for a guy that's had 3 major injuries over the last 4 years? It's not a good remedy. So I don't know what their formula is going to be to compete right now.
It feels like it's going to be a lot similar to what we saw last season, which I know Giants fans don't want to hear that, but I just, like you, Baldy, I agree. I don't really see the upside for that team right now. How about the team that I root for?
Before we go,
well,
we'll get to your Cowboys in a second. I want to hit them. I wrote a column about the Raiders, and you've played in the league, right? This interim coach thing. There's been 46 interim coaches that have coached, right? 12 of them became the head coach. Really, the only 2 that have had modest success were Marrone in Jacksonville and the Clapper, Jason Garrett at Femi's beloved Dallas Cowboys. The change from interim to full-time is a really challenge that I think, unless you've been in the industry, you really have a hard time understanding it. And now you don't have a quarterback at the Raiders, and you take a tight end. I know the Raiders are good up front in their defensive front, but where else are they good?
Well, I do think it helps that they kept the defensive staff, Mike. And so Patrick Graham, you look at the coaches, they've got some, they got some consistency there on that side of the ball. I thought Josh Jacobs was a great player. I would have tried to keep Josh Jacobs. I would have tried to, instead of drafting another tight end, I might have drafted one of these elite offensive tackles and at least tried to, stay with a good, sound, strong running game to help whatever quarterback steps in there, at this point right now. So, they're still looking up, because they're a quarterback short right now of how you win in this business. And they've got backup guys at that position right now. So I think all they did, look, the interim coach thing, we'll see how it plays out. But I think the quarterback situation is very questionable at this point. And how they're gonna move the ball, sustain offense, play keep away, all the stuff you got to do with Kansas City, with what we know Harbaugh is going to do with the Chargers. It's just they look like they're just looking up at everybody else in that division.
Baldy, we got about a minute left here. It's been awesome, honestly. We appreciate you taking the time and joining us here on the GM Shuffle. Simple question: are my Cowboys poised to take a step back this season?
Well, do you need to be poised to go backwards? Look, they won 12 games in a row, 3 years in a row. Dan Quinn, for whatever you want to think about Dan Quinn, his 3 years there, they had more takeaways than any team in this league. So that helped the offense, and they beat up on all the bad teams. And so it was a very, you have to really look at these 12 wins each year, because you can beat up on the Jets and the Giants and Washington like they did 3 years in a row and other teams like that. And you can get a padded schedule, and then you get to, the playoffs, and you realize you have an incomplete team. I still think they're a very incomplete team. I played for the Cowboys, Femi, for as long as I've known the Cowboys going back to Bob Lilly. For as long as I can remember the Dallas Cowboys, they've had an elite running back. You can't say that right now. They've always handed off to Dorsett or to Emmett or to somebody. Dan Reeves, Walt Garrison, they've always had an elite running back. Where is that? And then, okay, if you lose your starting center and starting left tackle, you can tell me that Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe they're going to be Zach Martin. You can tell me that. That's a lot to ask of two rookie linemen to come in and play at that kind of a level.